Listen, of course. Oh, sorry. Hi. Hello and welcome to The Jib, this bi-weekly podcast. And now that I'm thinking about it, we should probably call it fortnightly, because bi-weekly is twice a week or once every 2 weeks. Anyway, this bi-weekly podcast is about the many and varied schemes of the many and varied U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agency or organizations, committees, and how they are stupid and funny. Join us on our merry journey through space and time. Hi, my name is Barry, and I've never seen Titanic or The Lion King.
Hi, everybody. I am Seamus, and I've only seen a few bits of the Titanic, much like those folks in a submarine recently. So.
Let's see what you did there.
Yeah. What?
You made a joke.
Yeah.
But this is not a joke. This is a serious podcast, Seamus, for serious people. We're not here to make light of issues, okay?
I'm sorry. I'm sinking to one below, I guess.
Okay.
So.
We're going to talk about a serious issue today. We're going to talk about Cuba.
Absolutely.
And we're going to talk about Operation Mongoose. And there will be nothing funny happening anywhere here.
No, not at all.
It was people died. All right? And there's a whole bunch of people in Miami right now who will watch this and go, don't know about that. All right?
You're talking about Florida. I mean,
we're talking about,
Florida's got enough shit going on that they're not going to worry about what we say on this podcast. So
I'll say this for the Cuban Revolution: it dramatically improved Florida cuisine. Okay, not funny. Okay, we're doing serious business. Okay, like I remember seeing this show called One Day at a Time on Netflix, and it's comedy based on the Norman Lear thing, and it's
it's a completely different reboot, not the same at all.
And my
son used to watch it. Yeah, my son used to watch it.
And but like it was all this kind of lighthearted comedy until something was said about Cuba, and then suddenly everything gets totally serious and goes, you cannot joke about this. Yeah, you can. Fuck it. Right. We're here to talk about Operation Mongoose. Yeah. Will I kick into our script?
Oh, let's start. Have to.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Since the 18th century, this is how far I'm laying the groundwork, right?
We're going all the way back there.
Oh, further back than that. Since the 18th century, Cuba has been part of the Spanish colonial empire. In the late 1800s, Cuban revolutionaries fought against Spain in a series of wars up to the Cuban War of Independence in 1895, which should have been the end of it, right? In 1898, it wasn't the end of it, President William McKinley signed a joint congressional resolution demanding the withdrawal of Spain and authorizing the use of force to defend Cuban independence. In response, Spain severed diplomatic relations with the U.S. On the same day... Which?
That'll teach him.
Well, I mean, it's hard to believe that, like, 1898 is not that long ago. It's like 120 years ago, and Spain and America were at war with Spain. It's so weird, right?
Yeah.
Remember
the Maine? Wasn't that
the Spanish Maine?
Yeah, remember the Maine? No, it was the ship, our ship that blew up, and they blamed.
Oh, yeah. That's what we're going to talk about next, but I didn't mention the ship. You knew about that already, then?
Yes, I did. Sorry.
Oh, cool. I did not.
Yep.
Why don't you write the scripts then?
Never mind.
You're clearly better at it.
I'll be quiet. We can talk more about it as we go.
Okay. So. On the same day as the Spain severed diplomatic relations, on the same day the U.S. Navy began a blockade of Cuba. Now, the reason I'm mentioning these things is to situate in context for you, in case all you ever heard about Cuba is Fidel Castro took over and made things difficult, right? There's a history here within living memory of people in Cuba at the time between the U.S. and Cuba that makes sense of a lot of the things that they did. On the same day, the U.S. Navy blockaded Cuba in 1898. Both sides declared war, which ended, meaning Spain and America. Of course, once again, like the peace summit of Palestine, to which only the U.S. and Israel were invited, only Spain and America were invited to the discussions about what should happen to Cuba. Right.
Right.
And both sides declared war, which ended in a comprehensive victory for the U.S. and, among other things, in what seems tangential, but it was part of the same negotiations, the sale of the Philippines to the U.S. for $20 million.
This whole colonial imperialism, just, we talk about it too much. It's not that big of a deal. It wasn't. Come on, you guys need to get over it, right?
How many Filipinos do you think were consulted about that?
Exactly.
To the nearest
Jesus
zero.
Christ. Yeah.
They were regarded by many, including Pershing, as kind of subhuman, not real people, And thankfully, one of the guys who wrote against that was Mark Twain. He wrote a beautiful piece. He wrote a beautiful piece. He called them savages, but that's just what they were called. But he said these savages are just the same as the rest of us. Why do you think it's okay to kill literally hundreds of thousands of them?
Right.
But Mark Twain did great if you want to look it up. That's nothing to do with Operation Mongoose. This is all just setting it up. Now, part of the Spanish-American War was, was an operation called the Battle of Tyacoba, which is what you were talking about just there, where U.S. special forces tried to land a small army of Cubans onto a Cuban beach, right? It was an embarrassing disaster as the Spanish army not only destroyed the troops, but sank the ship too. Don't remember the Maine, right? Now, the reason when I looked up an article about this was an embarrassing disaster. It's referred to as a successful. The sentence used in Wikipedia, I think, was they successfully landed troops on the beach, but they didn't say anything else. Now, this is an example of why the truth can be a lie. The truth is not facts. The fact is, it's factually accurate to say that they successfully landed troops on the beach. That's a fact. But the truth is that it was an embarrassing disaster, right? Fact and truth are not the same thing. Yeah,
Watergate was a success. They were able to get a lot of the stuff that they wanted, but it was a disaster, right?
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to. You can tell lies with just facts.
Yeah.
Another part of the Spanish-American War was the sensationalist journalism published by William Randolph Hearst, among others.
Oh, that guy.
Well, we mentioned it before a few times, didn't we?
Yeah, another returning champion.
Yeah, returning champion. Yeah, this particular script does not mention Henry Kissinger, but we do have Hearst, William Randolph Hearst, and it doesn't mention what's our other returning champion, Hoover.
Oh, there is somebody else. Whatever we mention him, I'll point it out. I'll point out there. We do have another returning champion.
Yes, we do.
When we talk.
But these essentially, the yellow press journalism was lying about Spanish atrocities against Cuban civilians, right? And again, this will be. This is all context. I'm not just setting up nothing here. In 1902, the U.S. ceded control of Cuba to President Palma, who was a U.S. citizen, but at least he was born in Cuba. American cash started flowing in very quickly, and by 1905, 60% of rural land was owned by non-Cuban Americans.
That's crazy.
It's absolutely crazy. The whole thing was privately owned by Americans by 1905, 3 years after they ceded control. Ceded, right?
Yeah.
U.S. Marines were stationed on Cuba from 1906 to 1909, but they came back to intervene in 1912, 1917, and 1921, right? So this whole thing about Cuba and America didn't just crop up because of Fidel Castro, right?
Yeah.
Right. Now, in
1930... That's a lot of intervening, Barry.
It is a lot of intervening, yeah. In 1933, Fulgencio Batista used his influence over the military and civil administration to basically be the guy who made the decisions, right? He wasn't the president, but he kind of was. The same year, Cuba was described by a British minister as a U.S. protectorate, which was kind of accurate, even though it wasn't, right?
Right.
Now, while in Cuba, Batista made himself massively wealthy, as these guys always do. Look at him, what a cock. If I can just say that. Look at him.
Well, like I said before, he looks like that Bison guy from Street Fighter.
You did say that. He does, yeah. He's kind of presenting himself to what, hello.
Yeah.
You know, he's a real... do not like that man. Anyway,
no.
He made himself massively wealthy off the back of Cubans. He was elected president in a perfectly fair election, I have to say. He was elected president from 1940 to 1944. And after the end of his term, he moved to Florida. Now, he came back in 1952, and instead of the quiet background coup of the 1930s, where he was kind of working away in the background, he staged a noisy foreground type of coup and just took over. This time, he was a proper old-school fascist dictator, controlling universities, the press, the government, rigging elections, and quashing any attempts at worker organization. He also transferred massive amounts of cash from the successful Cuban economy into his bank account, right?
What a guy.
Now, during the Batista era, Arthur Miller, the playwright, described Cuba as hopelessly corrupt, a mafia playground, right? A bordello for Americans and other foreigners, right? This is a quote from Senator John F. Kennedy in 1960, as he was then. Fulgencio, I'll just go in with the quote, right? I'm not going to do the accent. Fulgencio Batista, no. Murdered 20, no. Fulgencio Batista murdered 20,000 Cubans in 7 years gap, and he turned democratic Cuba into a complete police state, destroying every individual liberty. Yet, our aid to his regime and the ineptness of our policies enabled Batista to invoke the name of the United States in support of his reign of terror. Administration spokesman publicly praised, he means U.S. administration, spokesman publicly praised Batista, hailed him as a staunch ally and a good friend at a time when Batista was murdering thousands, destroying the last vestiges of freedom, and stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from the Cuban people, and we failed to press for free elections. Right, that's the quote from Senator John F. Kennedy in 1960.
And we will never do that as Americans going forward. I mean, you'll never have.
That's pretty much what.
Yeah, you'll never have an American president say, "God, there was an actor," talk about, fascist dictators and killers.
Well, it's very rare to see the Americans
America.
criticizing the guy they support.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's something in his favor. I mean, he didn't notice. I mean, that's something.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they think it's fine. Like,
no, it was good on JFK to point this out.
Like in our Guatemala episode, nobody gave a shit about Guatemala. Nobody was talking about that, right? Like this. Yep. Yeah. Fidel Castro, you may have heard of him before. We have a photo of him if you don't, I think.
Yep. But we have two. Which one do you want first? Do you want the
you
want this one or you want the
Yeah, give me the Che one because we're talking about a revolution right now.
Yep.
And then we can do the other photo for the other bit.
Gotcha.
We've got a bit, by the way. Planned. Fidel Castro led an uprising. There's Fidel on the left, by the way. In the middle is Che, Ernesto Guevara. Fidel Castro led an uprising against Batista throughout most of the 1950s. And on the first day of 1959, Cuba was finally free of Batista, depending on your point of view, I guess. Right. Castro immediately embarked on a program to nationalize everything, right? Centralize the press and consolidate civil society. These were all popular reforms. He also shut down the casinos, the brothels, and the national lottery. These were less popular reforms.
Yeah, that's not going to be played. The mafia is not going to like that.
No, Cubans as well.
Well, that
Cubans.
too.
Yeah. Because they're still people,
Yeah.
Castro also refused to hold old-school democratic elections for what turned out to be very sensible reasons. The first being that the entire old school.
Sorry,
the first being that the entire old school in the sense of the Cubans did have democratic elections before.
Yeah.
The first being that the entire political class was so corrupt that an election would be essentially meaningless. And the second being that the CIA had an established habit already of swooping in on democratic elections across Latin America and other places and rigging the hell out of them. And
wait a minute. You're saying America. You really mean Russia, right?
No, Russia wasn't doing that.
Russia didn't mess with their election?
Not yet. No, they would do that in the future. But in 1959 in Cuba, they had nothing to do with Cuba.
Right.
At this stage, they had nothing to do with Cuba. They had something to do with Cuba very shortly afterwards. But right now, they have nothing to do with Cuba.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just doing what's referred to as being facetious, I believe.
Facetious.
Or something like that. Yeah.
Facetious, yes. One of the two words in the English language that has every vowel once and only once and in the correct order.
What's the other one?
Abstemious. Meaning to stay away from things. And facetious meaning to make a joke about a thing that you shouldn't do.
Is this from you playing Wordy too much?
This is from me playing board games, I guess. Word games, yeah.
Yeah.
And doing crosswords and things. And the CIA had a habit of rigging the hell out of the elections, and he knew that if he had a democratic election right after that, it's also a sensitive time. Right after a revolution is always a sensitive time. There's a power vacuum, and it's a good time for the CIA to jump in. Castro then cut all ties with the United States, seized all U.S.-owned assets, which was pretty much all the private land, by the way, if you remember.
Right.
Seized all U.S.-owned assets as part of the nationalization program and entered into diplomatic relations with the USSR. That's when the Soviets got involved. When Castro said, "Will you please get involved in my country?" Right.
Yeah.
In 1961, the Americans snapped into action. After sending a squadron of B-52 bombers to take out the airfields, the CIA arranged and funded another attempt to land a small army of Cubans on the beach. The Bay of Pigs was a catastrophic failure, like the what's it called? Tayacoma.
Yeah.
No, I said that wrong. I want to get it right.
Did you?
Yep. Tayacoba, that's it. Like Tayacoba, it was a catastrophic failure. Most of the Cuban expats ended up in Cuban jails, and it gave Castro some international legitimacy, which is the one thing the Americans didn't want. Right. It also pushed Cuba even closer to the USSR, which is another thing the Americans didn't want, right? Now that direct action was off the agenda, the CIA could do what it does best. Propaganda, sabotage, psychological warfare, and assassination plots. Operation
all the greatest hits.
All the greatest hits, yeah, coming back, right? They've put the band back together. Operation Mongoose, led by Air Force Brigadier General Edward Lansdale. Was a
There's our other returning champion right there, man.
You will have heard of this man before in our Vietnam episode. He coordinated the bullshit campaign, the CIA in Vietnam, where they frightened all the Catholics down into southern Vietnam. Go listen to that episode after this. It's very good. The Vietnam one. I'm very happy with it. And it doesn't have enough numbers, all right? Not to get logistical with it, but go listen to it, all right? You know what happens is all of Seamus's episodes do better numbers-wise than mine do. And
that's not true. That's not true.
No. I'm not bitter about it. That's the main thing. All right? Everybody wants to hear about Freddie Hampton, but you talk about Vietnam, and people are like, oh, no, can't talk about that, Barry. Too soon,
true.
yeah? Too soon.
That's true.
Screw you guys. Anyway, that guy was Colonel Edward Lansdale. This guy is Air Force Brigadier General Edward Lansdale, so I guess he was rewarded for his voting games.
Moving on up.
He had a three-pronged plan of attack. The first was to overthrow Castro and install a more America-friendly dictator, which is standard operating procedure, right?
Yeah.
We've spoken before about how this was achieved in Guatemala with Che, if you recall. And we will talk again about how it was achieved in many other countries. Yes, we will. The quick summary is that it's cheaper than you think, it's easier than you think, and it worked in most places. It did not work.
You trying to sell this?
It's a very good, if you have no fucking morals and you want a country's stuff and you don't give a shit about the people, it's quick, it's easy, and it works most of the time. It did not work in Cuba.
And for 1999, that's it.
And for 1999, yeah. The CIA spent way too much time cooking up assassination plots to get rid of Fidel Castro. And by way too much time, I mean way too much time. There were many, many ideas floating around Langley about how to make this happen, and Washington, I guess. A reasonable estimate puts it somewhere north of 700 ideas and actual things that they tried to do. So I guess it might be time for another classic Jib Top 10. Here are the top 10 CIA Fidel Castro assassination plans. All right, this week's number 10, in 1960, the CIA planned to poison Castro's cigars with deadly toxin that causes muscle paralysis. The cigar never actually got to him. In 1961, the CIA planned to rig one of Castro's cigars with explosives. The plan was not enacted. Castro gave up smoking in 1985, so the cigar-based comedy came to an end.
I didn't know that. I didn't know he stopped smoking.
I didn't
so
know
much
either.
part of his persona. You know?
His mystique, yes, his cigar-based comedy, yeah.
Him and Groucho Marx, right? Yeah.
Oh, I think he'd be great as a comedian. He'd be doing, like, some of the UN speeches were kind of funny.
He definitely has a good one-liners, that's for sure. Yeah.
At number 9, in 1960, the CIA planted a motion-activated exploding seashell near where Castro liked to scuba dive. The plan failed when the seashell failed to detonate. All right. 8. In 1963, a CIA agent slipped poison into Castro's drink during a visit to the United Nations. The plan failed. 7. In 1960, the CIA planted high explosive charges in a fountain pen. The pen was supposed to explode when clicked, but the plan failed. What a James Bond thing. 6.
The fountain pen, I guess they counted on the wrong person, right? You know, they...
That wasn't a movie with... I think it was Alan Cumming was the guy who was clicking the pen. It was in Tomorrow Never Dies or something.
Yeah, one of those.
Pierce Brosnan, yeah. And it was like it was actually quite a tense scene. I remember watching it thinking, oh, Jesus, he better click that shit again or we're all going to die, you know? It was well directed scene in James Bond.
CIA just gave too much of an homage to Ayn Rand, you know, so... the fountain pen.
Number 6. In 1963, a CIA agent gave Castro a camera that was rigged to explode when used. The plan failed. Number 5. In 1963, a CIA agent put poison in a chocolate milkshake that was given to Castro at the former Havana Hilton. The poison got stuck to the freezer where the agent was supposed to get it. He pulled on the poison thing and the poison went everywhere, all over the kitchen. So that plan failed. In 1963, the CIA booby-trapped a wetsuit that was designed to disintegrate when it came into contact with water. The plan failed. In 1975, the Senate Intelligence Committee claimed it had, and by the way, I'm getting a lot of this information from the Church Committee report.
Right.
The Senate Intelligence Committee.
Not just making this shit up and pulling out of your ass.
I'm not just making this shit up. Yeah, this is all resourced, I promise you.
Yep.
Claimed that it had concrete evidence of a plan to give Castro a wetsuit lined with deadly fungus. The plan would involve an agent presenting Castro with a suit during negotiations for the release of the Bay of Pigs prisoners. The plan failed because the agent gave Castro a different diving suit on his own initiative. Whatever happened there, right? No further details. 2. In 1963, a CIA-trained Cuban exile attempted to shoot Castro with a high-powered sniper rifle. Now that's an assassination attempt I can get behind, right?
Yeah.
Plan failed, but Castro's personal bodyguard was killed.
Oh, shit.
So we got close. That got close. And number 1 is, as late as the year 2000, 90 kilograms, right, for the Americans is enough to fill a hot dog stand or whatever, I don't know. 90 kilograms of high explosives were placed under a podium in Panama where Castro was due to speak. His own security team found the bomb, and so once again the plan failed. And that is our top 10. Have we ever had a top 10 that did not have some bonus rounds?
Right? Nope.
Right. The bonus round is the CIA convinced an ex-lover of Castro, and my God, that man has a large number of ex-lovers. Castro. That man's penis was busy. CIA convinced an ex-lover of Castro, Marita Lorenz, to feed him poison pills which were hidden in her cold cream. On the night, the pills dissolved in the cold cream, and she was unsure whether she should force feed him the actual cold cream or abandon the operation. Castro somehow worked out what was going on and gave her his gun so she could just shoot him, which is quite gallant of him, I believe.
Yeah.
Gallant, right? She said, and this is attested in multiple sources, she said, "I can't do it, Fidel. No puedo, I guess. No puedo, Fidel." Lorenz became pregnant during her visit to Cuba and gave birth to a son in the U.S.
How did that happen?
Well, she claimed Castro was the father, but a DNA test disproved it, so I guess she was busy as well.
Okay.
There was also another bonus round. There was also I found it very difficult to limit myself because there are literally hundreds of these assassinations.
Right?
Yeah.
We could do a whole episode just on that. I mean,
yes. And I had to rein this in because I value you guys, our audience, I value your time. And I understand you can't, don't worry about it.
I would have.
James doesn't give a damn. He will sit there and tell you everything. There was also a non-fatal plan to spray an LSD mist near him while he was making a broadcast on national radio. The idea was to make him freak out on air, which was supposed to turn the people listening against him. And that plan failed. In fact, all 700 plus attempts to kill Castro failed. He died in 2016, presumably of natural causes. But that was just the first part. That's the first prong of Operation Mongoose, right?
Yeah.
The second prong was to foment insurrection. And I don't know if I've ever heard the verb foment used in any other context, but they were going to foment insurrection. This would be achieved by offering military training and logistical support to any paramilitary factions who didn't like Castro, which would be mainly exiles, spreading anti-Castro propaganda via covert radio broadcasts or leaflet drops, and so on. The huge, right?
Yep.
Third, to destroy the Cuban economy. Now, this would be achieved by wrecking crops and destroying the infrastructure like trashing sugar mills, which they did. These efforts failed when the USSR agreed to buy sugar from Cuba at 5 times the market rate and supported them in other ways, including sending petrol and fertilizers.
So there you go.
The American campaign against them backfired, right?
Yeah.
Whatever power and wealth Cuba had came from its agriculture industry at this point in time, and kind of now as well. Mainly sugar. Sugar was first grown in Cuba by Spain in 1523 and continues to be their biggest agricultural product today. Castro made some real attempts to diversify the economy. He did try, but the US embargo meant he couldn't get anything off the ground and was forced to return to a predominantly sugar-based agricultural sector, like my pancreas, which pushed Cuba closer again to the USSR, which was ostensibly the one thing the Americans were trying to avoid. The cynical...
But how I'm sorry, but also these embargoes and these sanctions, how many people are dying and literally, at the hands of this shit? I mean, that's the other thing. It's just mental,
embargoes are they didn't work in Cuba. They didn't achieve their aim, unless their aim was killing people and reducing their life expectancy and so on. The same thing about the embargo in Iran and Iraq at the time. It's not a good idea.
Thank
you. Because the people who are causing you all the trouble are insulating themselves from the effects of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what we got out of Afghanistan, and everybody's like, "Oh, this is great," but yeah, we put on more sanctions than we ever did before, and now we're putting people back in poverty. And then you wonder why people like the Taliban can come in and swoop in. We're creating fodder for them. It's fucking.
A lot of people in Afghanistan like the Taliban.
Happens. What's that?
A lot of people in Afghanistan approve of the Taliban. They like
exactly.
The Taliban,
yeah, because they. Well, anyways, I'm not going to go down that road. But you know what I'm saying? Yeah, we won't. Not tonight. Not today. So.
Yeah, so everything the Americans did pushed, and this was kind of predictable, pushed Cuba closer and closer to the Soviet Union. And it's not that they ever wanted to do that. They wanted to be independent. So a cynical observer throughout Latin America, because these are the only ones watching what's going on in Cuba, by the way, a cynical observer throughout Latin America might conclude that it wasn't a close relationship with the USSR the Americans were trying to avoid at all, but sovereign independence.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying that's what a cynical observer would say. Obviously, there's no way to read the minds of these people.
Are you a cynical, sir? Are you the signal? Is that you?
Well, that's what I believe. Yeah, I believe that, but I have no proof of it. I just think it's true.
Broke the fourth wall, Barry.
Broke the fourth wall. Okay. Operation Mongoose was officially terminated in 1963, although, as you're aware from the above, it continued unofficially for many years. Now, I have another bit to talk about. Although it could have been an episode to itself, as could the assassination attempts. It could have been an episode to itself. We should talk a bit about Operation Northwoods. You might have heard about this in conspiracy theory websites and so on, but it's not as bad as they say it is, but it's pretty bad. It was a sort of offshoot of Operation Mongoose, specifically dedicated to false flag ops. Now, if there's anybody watching this who doesn't already know, A false flag ops are those where you stage an attack pretending to be somebody else, therefore under a false flag. The idea was for the CIA to attack US military and civilian targets while pretending to be Cubans. Among the plans were to attack a US Air Force fighter jet, blowing up a US Navy ship, and terrorist attacks on US cities. Now, these were actual plans written down in Operation Northwoods saying, we will attack our own cities and blame the Cubans.
Yeah, whatever the recent release of the FBI, not the FBI files, the JFK files, right?
Yes.
That came out during Trump's 4 years. One of the things that everybody was like, oh, it doesn't tell you anything, doesn't tell you who did it. But one of the things that came out was shit like this, that they were talking about actually bombing places like in Miami and blaming on Cuba or Russia to start this part. And like nobody talked about it. I'm like, Jesus Christ.
This came out as well during the 9/11 things when they said, oh, 9/11 was an operation in inside. No, it wasn't. Okay, it wasn't. Surprise.
Right.
Like, it was definitely those Muslim guys on the jets. But the Americans do not do themselves any favors by the fact that, But the fact that Operation Northwoods is a real thing, a real plan that existed, does not really help them when they're trying to talk down those rumors. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, you wonder where Alex Jones got this stuff. He didn't pull it out of his. He didn't make it. No, he does make up a lot of shit and he's fucking crazy.
Yes.
But this shit is real. I mean, that's.
I would go as far as to say that every single thing that Alex Jones said is based on something that actually happened.
Fair.
But everything he said is bullshit. But everything he said is based on something that actually happened somewhere. I'll say that for him.
It's much like what we were just talking about, the invasion being a success. He would say it was, what I mean? It's this version of the facts. That's all.
Yeah.
So.
But this was an actual thing that they planned. And there's sub-operations of it. Operation Bingo was a plan to create the appearance of an attack on U.S. facilities in Cuba, thus providing an excuse for the use of U.S. military might to overthrow the current government of Cuba, which tells us two things. They were still planning to blow up American things, the American forces. And secondly, even in the middle of all this, there were U.S. facilities on Cuba. Another one is Operation Guantanamo Bay, right? Operation Dirty Trick was a plan to provide irrevocable proof that should the Mercury manned orbit flight fail, the fault lies with the communists and so on in Cuba. That was a plan. That was the one with John Glenn on it, right?
Right.
And there was, of course, anytime a shuttle goes up, there's a risk it might come down in a bad way. And they had planned, there was a plan that if it came down in a bad way, they were at a plan to blame the Cubans for it, right?
Yep.
Another plan in 1963 was to make it look like...
Let me stop just for 1 second, because an example of what you're saying, though, what we were talking about the Alex Jones would be the Challenger, right? It'd be easy for him to say, look, they did that, but for logistical reasons, they just didn't connect the dots and don't wait another day. Yeah, that's the kind of shit. If
Alex Jones told that bullshit about the Challenger, it was based on something that actually happened.
Right. Exactly. Which I don't know if he did it or not. I'm just saying that because it's
but that's exactly the kind of thing he would do. He would make up some stupid bullshit.
Yep.
But it's based on an actual plan called Operation Dirty Trick that's in a CIA warehouse somewhere, right? Another plan in 1963 was to make it look like Cuba had attacked Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. Since both were members of the British Commonwealth, the Joint Chiefs hoped that by secretly attacking them and then blaming Cuba, the United States could incite the people of the United Kingdom into supporting a war against Castro.
Yeah, because then it would be easier, right? We can just say, oh, we're just coming in to step up and help our buddies, right?
See, unfortunately, throughout all this, the United Nations was seeing what was going on. There were international observers, and they all kind of thought America was acting like a dick. Not so much during the Guatemala thing, but during Cuba, people were watching and they didn't like it. They thought it was just inhuman what was happening.
Well, I'm sure the Guatemala thing didn't help. I mean, that kind of probably primed them to see, oh, wait a minute, they're doing this shit again, but we're a little bit more interested over here for
everything the Americans did to Cuba pushed them closer and closer to Russia. The Cuban Missile Crisis, which I don't talk about here because it goes into too much detail, the Cuban Missile Crisis was entirely the fault of the Americans. Everything they did, what's his name, McNamara and Kennedy, and they're all to blame for that. I don't give a shit. That Cuban Missile Crisis was not Castro's fault. He was pushed into dealing with the Russians.
Oh, yeah. You can't blame him for that.
By the Americans.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's, again, an opinion and not a fact, right? Kennedy, in his defense, Kennedy killed the entire program. He killed Operation Northwoods as soon as he got a whiff of it. A memo by Edward Lansdale, our old friend, reads, the president said bluntly that we were not discussing the use of military force. There he is. And Kennedy said no to that whole thing. Now, here we go. I'm going to end with another quote from this time President John F. Kennedy in October 1963. This is a quote, a real quote from President Kennedy. I believe that there is no country in the world, including any and all countries under colonial domination, where economic, colonization, humiliation, and exploitation were worse than in Cuba, in part owing to my country's policies during the Batista regime. I approved the proclamation which Fidel Castro made in the Sierra Maestra when he justifiably called for justice and especially yearned to rid the Cuba of corruption. Not that Cuba, it's just Cuba. I will go even further. To some extent, it is as though Batista was the incarnation of a number of sins on the part of the United States. Now we shall have to pay for those sins. In the matter of the Batista regime, I am in agreement with the first Cuban revolutionaries. That is perfectly clear. Now, that is perfectly clear. That's President John F. Kennedy's.
He said that at what, October 63?
October 1963. Kennedy was assassinated a few weeks later in Dallas, Texas.
Oopsies.
Those are strong words from Kennedy pretty much in favor of Castro during a series of operations that were designed to kill him.
Yeah.
And apparently at least one operation designed to kill Kennedy. Right? And that is all I have because I didn't want to go into too much detail. That's all I have on Operation Mongoose. The Cuban Missile Crisis has nothing to do with Operation Mongoose, so I didn't mention it. That's Operation Mongoose.
It's fucking crazy, man.
What do you think of that?
It's fucking crazy. I mean, I had heard of the first time I heard of Operation Mongoose was the first time I saw the Oliver Stone film JFK. Because
great movie.
Joe Pesci's character was supposedly tied to Operation Mongoose. Well, I mean, I think in reality actually was David Ferry. That's who was supposedly an ex-CIA merc. So
yeah, it's in there's a new show on some channel called White House Plumbers.
Oh yeah.
And that's got Cuban as well.
My god,
it's fantastic. If you like our podcast and you like the things we talk about, you will love White House Plumbers with Woody Harrelson, and it's just brilliant.
Who's the actor that plays G. Gordon Liddy? He was in Mulholland Drive. He was in it. Oh fuck, I gotta look up his name. But he fucking nails it. And the other thing is, again, these things are not. What's that?
They all nail it.
Oh yeah,
it's a true story. It's a true story.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
It's not at all, just them trying to.
They haven't exaggerated. They've made up a few things, but they haven't exaggerated much.
Justin Theroux.
Justin Theroux. Yeah,
he's so fucking good as G. Gordon Liddy. Lena Headley's in it. Domhnall Gleeson is also in it. Yeah, he plays John Dean.
We call that Donald.
Yeah. So yeah,
they all play real people. There's a little banner that comes up at the start, and it says none of the names have been changed.
Yeah,
because they haven't.
Judy Greer plays Gordon Liddy's wife.
And by the way, some of these people are still alive. John Dean is still around, as far as I know. Gordon Liddy used to have a show on Fox.
Is he still alive too? Is it? Yeah, I think
he is. Yeah.
No, I mean Gordon Liddy's still alive, isn't he?
He had a show. Yeah.
He sold
very
gold
recently
and
had
all
a show
that
on
crazy
Fox.
shit.
So these are real people doing real things, and it's brilliant. And so in the first episode, it's all about the Spanish. These guys, basically ex-Operation Mongoose guys that they used to do dirty tricks for Nixon. But anyway,
that's fucking great.
That's my show. That is our show. My script.
Your show. God damn it! I have to get HR again. All right. Enough of this shit. All right, whatever.
Okay, so now are you ready for what's now? No, sorry, that was me. Yeah, sorry.
HR.
Okay. Just before every podcast, I put CIA into Google and hit the news tab. And Seamus puts FBI into Google and hits the news tab. And we then pick 2 or 3 stories we think might be interesting or funny. We have not told each other what these stories are, so we are hearing them for the first time, like you. Seamus, would you please share your stories?
Sure, I have 3. I'll kind of go through them briefly.
Okay.
I'm telling you, HR's get a lot this week.
You know what? Fuck HR. Yeah,
I said that. Number 6.
This is your first verbal warning. Okay.
Former New York City sergeant says FBI scapegoated him in China spy scandal. I believe this is the the issue where they try to basically frame somebody from China as being a spy, and she wasn't, and then they kind of blamed it on this.
Why would they do that? They don't have enough real ones.
You would think. All right. Let's see. Former Kansas City FBI analyst sentenced to prison for hoarding secret documents.
I like that you pronounce that analyst.
Analyst. Yeah. So yeah, he pulled a Trump and he had a bunch of paperwork he shouldn't have had. Yeah.
That's an ongoing issue, isn't it?
Yep. And then, oh shoot, okay, I got behind a firewall for this. Hold on a second. Docs show FBI pressured cops to keep phone surveillance secrets. So that whole FISA and all that other shit that they were.
You had a thing about that two shows ago.
Yeah, this is more. We're now that the police are actually admitting that, yeah, like locals, that they were.
But the FBI isn't supposed to have influence over cops, right? That's the mayor's office in the city, isn't it?
Yep.
Like, who'd you take orders from when you were a cop?
My superiors. I would, if the FBI told me to do something, I'd tell them to fuck off.
Right. They're the federales, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's like I thought I remember.
They could pull jurisdiction. But they have to have show cause.
Remember the X-Files? Whenever Mulder shows up, the local cop's like, "Oh, don't worry, guys, we're saved. The FBI is here." I was like, "Oh wow, okay, this tells me a lot about American culture and what it's like to be a cop." Okay, I also have 3 from my CIA. One is explosive book reveals Putin's plan to assassinate CIA informant. The details are: author Calder Walton joins CNN this morning to talk about his book Spies. The book reveals Russian President Vladimir Putin, unsuccessful assassination attempt of a CIA informant on U.S. soil. So that sounds like it's interesting.
Yep.
A second one is the headline is former CIA spy enters race for White House. A former CIA spy and staunch Donald Trump critic has announced he's entering the race to clinch the Republican nomination for the presidency. His name is Will Hurd, and he's a former Texas congressman.
Right.
The third one is, sorry, it's just I'll get through it. Don't worry. CIA used image of Hajj pilgrims to showcase surveillance and AI capabilities. Hajj, you know what Hajj is?
Hajj
is a Muslim thing. If you're a Muslim, you have to do 5 things to be a Muslim. You have to shahada, which is just say the words "I'm a Muslim," right? Or I love Muhammad or whatever. And the second thing is you have to fast in Ramadan, and which I think is called Sawat or something. Then you have to do Salah, which is pray 5 times a day. And then you have to do Zakat, which is giving 5% of your income to poor people. And then you have to do Hajj, which means you have to go to Mecca at least once in your life if you can afford it. Hajj, right? The CIA, the details are, the CIA used a photo of pilgrims attending the Hajj to illustrate the potential capabilities of new surveillance and artificial intelligence technologies. Digital rights and Muslim civil society organizations said the use of the photo highlighted grave concerns about fast-developing tools such as facial recognition software, and it was part of a pattern of Islamophobia within intelligence. Yes, is correct, by the way.
Yeah, thanks.
Law enforcement agencies. I mean, I don't love Muslims or anything, but they're right about this.
Yeah.
Law enforcement agencies in which Muslims were portrayed as a threat. That's a real issue. Portraying Muslims as a threat as default is a real issue. I remember watching a show once called Homeland, which was an American remake of an Israeli show. And the big fucking reveal at the end, the big pop, the big cliffhanger at the end of the season, right, was that the American guy was saying Muslim prayers and the dark music. And this was supposed to like scare people when they saw it. He was going, right? And when you see him doing this, you're supposed to think he's a bad guy. Like, fuck off.
Yeah.
It's such a disgusting thing to see. Muslims aren't the bad guys, all right? Sure, there's Muslim countries that are playing all sorts of weird shit, and I'm not a fan of that or anything. But if Muslims are in your community, they're not the bad guys, okay?
Well,
I guess people listening to this podcast already know that, but the way the culture is set up, sometimes it can seem like the default is the Muslims are the bad guys, and that's not true.
I'm sure we'll do an episode or 2 on
Islamophobia, Orientalism. There's a great book by Edward Said, right? The Palestinian writer Edward Said, called Orientalism, and he goes into detail about how this basically, we call it Islamophobia now, but it used to be, he calls it Orientalism. For centuries, the Middle Eastern swarthy, dark people have been seen as like shifty and dangerous, and you can't trust them and blah blah blah. But anyway, that's our show. That was the What's Now section of our show. And that might be our whole show, Seamus, unless you have other things.
No, just
or as I recently called it, my show. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember that?
Right, yeah, I do. I got it written down here.
I'm sorry. Okay, it's just because I wrote the script. I think of the show as like the scripts that I write and the scripts that you write.
It's all good. I was just gonna say, we'll definitely have to do an episode or 2. I mean, just look at Guantanamo Bay. How many people were actually guilty of anything down there?
Yeah.
And a lot of the games that the FBI, CIA, and such played post and pre 9/11, quite frankly, is why a lot of people it didn't help it didn't help any of the things that they were claiming that was happening.
No, they did not get any useful intelligence.
No, it also didn't help any hope of ending any kind of hatred of America.
Yeah.
You didn't. You kind of like went the other way, bud, with what you just did. But that's a lot of what the CIA
and a lot of
does.
Muslims in North Africa and the Middle East will say Israel as well. If you ask like what's going on, they'll just say, "Well, look what Israel's doing to Palestine. You lecturing me?"
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
That's our show, folks. Thank you for joining, and we will see you later.
Bye, guys.